The table saw and a sled and dado set makes for a great combination to cut box joints or finger joints. The way I do it, I don't have a dedicated sled for it. I just use my dado sled. But I use a board that's going to be my backer and it's going to have the finger on it. And the other part of this that makes this work well is I've got this piece of wood that I've got attached on here. And I've got a screw in the end here. So this obviously sticks out here and this screw butts up against that. So that's my stop for locating the finger for the jig. And the nice thing about this setup is by turning that screw, I can fine tune where this sits. And I can actually do that through this hole right here. I can put my screwdriver in there and turn that hole and not even unclamp that part. So that if I come back later with the same, say, 1/2 inch dado set, I can put this right back on and be ready to go. All I have to do is put a new backer on here and adjust the blade height for the thickness of material that I'm using. So I'm going to walk through the steps of how I do this. So far, I've just got a nice flat board. I've got a screw in the end here. Obviously, I've got this attached here. Now, this is set up so that when I'm not using this, I can take this screw out, rotate this vertical, and then put the screw back in there. So then it's totally out of the way. It doesn't affect my use of the sled at all. All I have to do is turn it back down, get my jig out, slide it up there, and I'm good to go. I'm going to start with this screw sticking out, I don't know, 3/8 or so. I've got that up against there, and I'm going to slide this forward. Now I've got a 1/2 inch dado set in here. So the finger that needs to go in here should match the dado set. And it needs to be a 1/2 inch away from the dado set. So I'm going to mark this where that's at. And I'll measure over 1/2 inch and cut my slot right there. And that's going to hold the finger that's going to locate my board when I'm cutting the finger joints. So I've got that marked. And I'm going to make my first cut right there. Now I want to cut a little higher than maybe 1/2 inch. So I want this cutout to be square, maybe a little taller than square. So I'll set the dado set so that's maybe 5/8 deep, and I'll make that cut. Next, I need to make the finger that sticks out of there. So it's not very long. I need it to come out, maybe a 1/2 inch from this front surface. This is about 3/4 thick, so it only needs to be about 1.25 inches long. Now, this always is a conundrum here because I've got the dado set on my saw. It'd be nice if I could rip that with a regular blade so I could switch the blade out. I'm just going to cut it on my bandsaw and I'll hand plane it till it fits nicely in there. I've got this little finger cut now, and it's a snug fit in that little dado there, which is what I want. I want it snug there, but I don't want to glue it in place because sometimes these get beat up, or for some reason I might want to replace them. So I want to be able to take it out. So a snug fit's good, but I don't want it snug at the end where I'm going to be putting my workpiece on there. If it's too tight, it's hard to get it off and on. And I really only use one side of this as a reference. So what I've done is I've sanded the end of that just out here at this end, so that it'll fit tight back here, but it'll be a little bit loose where the workpiece sits on there. So we'll push that in place. And we're ready to go. I've got a couple of test pieces here. I'm going to cut box joints in the end. I'm going to start by setting the blade height just a little thicker than these parts, and that's That's actually pretty good. I'm just going to come up just a touch there. All right, so that's because I'm using this for the first time, the cut this makes is going to be correct for this material. If I already had a cut there that was too tall, then when I cut my stock, I would get tear out on the back side of the cut. So I'd put a thin backer here, maybe just some 1/4 inch MDF or something. But because this is a fresh piece, I'm not going to do that. So I've got this up against my stop. I think I'm in about the right spot there. And I'm going to make a test cut. Now I do need to clamp this in place. Now if I was using this a lot, I would probably put some slots in here and then maybe use some T-bolts to hold this to my fence. So I drill a hole here and here and hold this on with T-bolts. I'm not going to do that because I don't use this very often. I'm just going to use a couple of clamps on here. So that's going to work just fine. And we'll go ahead and start. So I'm going to make my first cut up against this right side of the finger. Now remember, the other side's the sanded side, and that's really not a reference. It could be, but I'm only going to use the right side of this. So I'll slide that up there, make my first cut, and then I'll just move over to finish that up. Okay, I've got my first set. Now, when I make the second set, I want to start with the material there. So I want a finger width away from there. So I'm going to take the first one I cut, turn it around, put that on there like that, and now I've got a good reference to make my first cut. Then once that cut's made, I'll get rid of this one and then continue on as usual. Okay, let's see how these fit. Well, that looks pretty good. It's a little bit loose. I prefer that. I mean, ideally, I can support the weight of the piece by just holding it. So I've got a little bit of looseness. Now, the way to think about how I'm going to fix this is the width of the opening is fixed because of the cutter. So what I have to adjust is the thickness of the finger. And the thickness of the finger is set by the distance between this pin and the blade. So I need to move the pin to the left. So I'll loosen up my clamps here. And I'm going to move this to the left. I have to screw my screw in a little bit. So I'll put the clamps back on and we'll try it again. Okay, and that's pretty good. That might be actually a little bit too tight. I went a little bit too far. So anyway, you get the idea. So I would move the my jig here slightly towards the blade, and that would probably do it. Now, a couple things to watch for when you're doing this is, if you've ever done it, you know it's really important that when you're holding the material on here, you have to keep it flat against the sled. People have a tendency to you want to push to the side, and they end up lifting up a little bit, and that really messes things up. So it's really important that it's down flat, you're tight against your jig here, and you're up against, you know, the right side of this pin. And as long as you keep everything flat against the sled, against the jig, and your pressure is consistent, you'll get good results. But the consistent pressure is really important to make this work well. So I think that's it for this. Pretty simple. I would make, you know, maybe one of these for each thickness of dado set that I'm using. I typically, if I'm doing this, I use 1/2 inch. So this will work for me most of the time. If you do start with different material, you're going to want a new backer, particularly if the new material is thinner, right? If it's thicker, I'll be cutting deeper than this and I'll be okay. But if the cut is shallower, we need a new backer to avoid tear out in your stock. So I'll typically just use a piece of 1/4 inch, you know, MDF. This is some hardboard I had kicking around. So I need to put this in place here, but obviously I can't put it here with the finger there. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to put a mark there, which I've already done, and I need to be able to fit this over that. Now I've already kind of eyeballed where I want this. You know, I'll just have it even with this edge of the jig. So I'll take this off, and I'll make a cut that's at least as high as this finger. So I should have checked that and make sure. So I just go a little higher than, I just need to clear it. And I'll go ahead and make a cut there. Okay, so now I can put this back in place up against my stop, clear out any chunks there, and that now sits over there. I've got a fresh surface here as a backer, and this is why I said earlier, I noted earlier, this might be, you might want this a little bit longer, just because when you put a backer on here, you've lost a little bit of the length. So another 1/4 1/2 inch there should be good. So I think that's it for the box joint jig.